Are you able to hear me okay and see the screen and my presentation? Not able to hear you, Johnson. So just checking that, again, in terms of, what we're going to be looking at covering today is learning outcome 4 in this unit, which is academic and research skills. So we are looking at, moving ahead with what we discussed yesterday in terms of note making and note taking, what is active and passive listening, how do we look at, sometimes summarizing and paraphrasing information. And we looked at OSCELA, which was the University of Oxford, referencing system, which has been developed, specifically for the law, activity or laws by the Law Society in terms of, referring cases or basically looking at, when we do referencing for law papers or law cases in particular. So today we are going to be looking at starting with, what is called learning outcome 4, 5 and 6. They will be done in tandem. And the reason why they're going to be done in tandem is that, they require us to look at picking up, a piece of research which could be done, which has to be basically picked up, and then this could be a case study, which could be a case law that you pick up, and then at some stage, what we need to be able to do is basically look at summarizing this in our own words, then look at presenting it, and then present the findings and reflect how what we've learned from that case study or the research that we have done. So in the first, first of the learning outcomes that we're going to cover, it talks about be able to plan and draft a piece of research. So here there are 3 assessment criteria. Number 1 is it talks about create a plan for research on a chosen topic in law. So my suggestion here would be that when we look at, choosing a topic in law, here the idea would be to try and look at relating to cases or looking at cases which are basically related to some sort of I would say civil oblique criminal or public oblique private law cases which you've heard about, you read about, or you're at least aware about. And there'll be some tips that I will provide in terms of what websites you can look at predominantly to look at some of these cases which you can pick up, read, and then look at bringing them into drafting it as a piece of research going forward. So these cases, as I mentioned, could be related to the impact of legislation on business. So if we look at picking out some of the areas that we generally see wherein the impact of legislation is important when we run a business or an organization which is registered as a business charity with the Companies House or the Companies House Act of 2006. Here you could look at picking up a case study, which basically is a case being brought out, or case which has been which will give us a bit of coverage under the impact of legislation. You could use other things like the use of force majeure, which is in the case of economic downturn. Sometimes businesses are not able to keep up with their rent, as you can see in the COVID-19 pandemic. And there will be a clause which will be the use of force majeure, which is a clause which will be used by some businesses to, look at, getting or buying some time in terms of, to be able to pay the rent. And this would primarily be covered, because there are unforeseeable circumstances, which prevent someone from filling a contract. So in this case, the force majeure, the word which is a French word which basically means unforeseeable circumstances, prevent the party from fulfilling a contract. It could be other cases that we could look at, which would be the right of minority shareholders in a takeover. Some of these then tend to become bigger activities wherein you could have lots of case study and reports available. Shareholders activism and corporate social responsibility and comparable study of corporate governance and disclosure requirements, for a company which is listed on the stock exchange. So these could be some of the topics, but this is just some suggestions that you could look at, because there are lots of cases out there which you could primarily pick out, and these cases that could be picked out would allow you to develop your develop your research as a case study and then present it or draft it for learning outcome 4. Now, the main part that you will look at in terms of, if I have to say that how you would basically look at doing this particular part of the assignment, would be when I say learning outcome 4, if I just parallelly show you in terms of how this will need to be looked at, just to give you some idea and some tips. So here, when I look at parallelly opening up, say, a Word document, and see, if you want to basically look at starting this off as a bit of a task, what we want to be able to do is, from the unit specification here, it talks about, create a plan on a research topic which can be used to, draft a piece of research. So what I'm going to do is primarily write it here. And then the second task would basically look at asking you to, if I go forward, this research needs to look at collating, or wherein in terms of background, when I say background, you're looking at basically doing a bit of literature review, and this literature review that you gather, which is the existing piece of information which is already published, available in the public domain, you're going to gather that from appropriate sources, and that needs to be listed. And last but not the least, the merit task is going to ask you to basically send that draft piece of research to me as a tutor. And what I'm going to do is give you some feedback to say, okay, this topic is correct, this topic is fine, and you could look at doing some elaboration on this. And then once the topic is approved, you can go ahead and actually develop this into your piece of research. So if I look at, the academic and research skills unit here, and we look at specifically covering, learning outcome 4, which is be able to plan and draft. So draft a piece of research. So here what I would do is basically look at first the chosen topic. So here, why I would look at choosing a particular topic, for research. So I'm going to basically look at drafting a topic. I'm going to talk about a bit of background of research. I'm going to look at a rationale for research, and then just define or say take up and define one or maximum 2 objectives, in terms of why this research is being undertaken. So 1 or 2 objectives for the research that you will do, and this would be then good enough in terms of a proposal or a plan that you will draft. And this plan or a proposal that you will draft will essentially be about, I would say, 200 to 250 words, maybe a page, and that would be good enough to getting an approval, and obviously looking at accomplishing this part of the task, or achieving this part of the task. But you'll have to divide it into these sections, which will primarily start with the, I would say, the background for research, or and then rationale why you've chosen this. So in the rationale, you're basically looking at then defining the topic of research, and last but not the least, you'll define 1 or 2 objectives, which will be a part and parcel of why you're actually looking at doing this study, and that would be drafted in about 200 to 250 words, which will basically complete this task, which says create a plan for research on a chosen topic in law. Now, in terms of just sharing my screen for a minute, but trying to go across to show you some topics wherein you could actually look at case laws, which could be looked at for research. There are a few websites that you can look at, and these case laws for research for free can be used from these particular sites, which allow you to primarily pick out 1 or 2 relevant areas which you feel are going to be say of importance to you, and you can pick that up and basically use that to draft the proposal. So just for a second, UK case law examples, that is what I want to pick out. So here, if I just share my screen again, this particular website that we look at, which is case law search, it is called BILIG, BILIG, or bili.org is a database which primarily allows you to search court cases in the UK. So there are lots of different types of cases that you can pick out, and this particular site would be a good site for you to look at going through, and then depending on your interest and what you want to look at doing a bit of research on, you could pick out cases which could be, say, for example, in the United Kingdom. This is only specifically to UK. The idea would be, if you want to pick out, say, for example, a specific case which has been dealt or under a particular topic, what you could do is choose a topic from here, and this will bring out the case history or the case summary of that particular case that you're looking at. So if I look at choosing, for example, basically looking at the tribunal wherein you're looking at asylum and immigration, and if you try and search or try and find a case, in terms of any of the cases that you are aware of, then this database will allow you to basically do that search. Now, there are what you call searches that you can do primarily on legislation as well, and this would allow you to pick out cases which could be basically looked at from any of these one particular areas. Now, this site is serving a bit of an error, so I don't know in terms of why, but if it could be that maybe in some cases, if you look at choosing or having details which you can actually do an advanced search would be much more useful. So when I go by case search, for example, and I look at a particular case which was, say, done in, say, for example, it's a very recent one in 15 January 2021. And as you can see, this is a case which has been brought out by Olufonso Adedeji against the University Hospital, Birmingham. And, obviously there is some sort of an, case which has been brought up by the person against the NHS. And the case and case details in terms of the history is primarily being provided. Now, when you look at picking out an appropriate, topic in law, the idea would be to try and pick out a topic which is an area of your interest. So if I go into databases, and in databases, if I look at various types of cases which have been listed here, so go across over to England and Wales predominantly. If you want to look at other cases also, this is a good site for you to refer to a lot of different types of cases which are listed here in this particular database. So you could pick out anything under the civil cases, criminal cases, administrative cases, reviews. When we talked about different systems of court which are prevalent in the UK, there are lots of cases, depending on which one you want to pick out. So this site would be a good site for you to look at picking out a particular, let's say, case or a report, and that would allow you to do your research and then pick out something quite recent like 2021 if it's available. And there are different types of cases which come up. So if I click on any one of them, as you can see, this particular case is also available, and is basically a summary of what was the case all about, what was the judgment passed, what were the evidence, and what was the presentation of evidence from the defendant, and whether the decision has been upheld, what were the grounds of appeal if in this case it has happened. And as you can see, this is quite detailed enough for you to firm up something as a topic that you would want to go about and research. So here, when you go through this particular case, the idea is you're going to be creating a bit of a research plan. And that plan is going to be presented by reading through this particular case law. And then you present what is the background in terms of why this case was brought up. What was the rationale of this case being filed? And then, what were the main points of contention, or basically the main areas or issues against which this case was essentially filed. And then what you do is basically summarize this information in your words, in about 200 to 250 words, and that would basically form a plan. Is that clear? Is that okay? Any questions on this, Johnson? So this particular site is useful primarily to look at studying a lot of law cases, which you can look at. It's like a bit of a repository, and it allows you to, look at picking out a particular topic which could be of interest to the exercise or the task 4.1. Now, when we look at research, now in terms of typical areas of research when we do dissertation, there are, the dissertation is normally presented in 5 or 6 chapters, and this tends to be, you look at, obviously picking up a topic or an area of interest. You do a bit of introduction, and that introduction typically includes, the reasons. Introduction would typically include this bit, which is talking about the background of research. You're looking at rationale of research. You're also at some stage defining the objectives, aims and objectives of the research. And then you're also presenting a small sort of a timeline or a Gantt chart, which basically explains how you would go about carrying out or undertaking that research. The second part tends to be normally a literature review, wherein you would review and go through the existing material which is available in the public domain. Either it's published or, it's available. When I say published, it's available on websites, articles, through journals, previous researches which have been carried out in that area. And that review that you do of the existing, literature is called, or the existing data and information which is available in the public domain would be termed as literature review. The third part of your research that you do, or the research study that you do, is basically research methodology. So here you're going to be looking at defining what kind of approach you would take, whether you would take an interpretivist approach or you would take a positivist approach. You would look at defining into or getting into understanding what kind of research or areas in terms of data collection that you would look at, whether it would be primary research, secondary research. Then you go into the types of techniques, research techniques that you look at, and then you would go into defining, basically, let's say a sampling size. You would look at, if you're looking at collecting primary data or secondary data, you're going to be looking at defining, the various, let's say, the areas through which, or, how you would essentially go about collecting the data. And all that part is primarily done in the research methodology. So if I look at, showing you a research onion, which normally is something that we use in order to conduct the research. So what you generally get to see, if I just magnify this, this is, you start off with, looking at the approaches. You look at going into the methodology, which is what kind of methods you will look at for collecting data, whether it will be qualitative, quantitative, or you'll use a mix of both methods. Then you look at how data sampling is going to be done. And then you go into, for example, collection of actual data, which is done from participants, if it's primary, if it's secondary, then from various sources. And that would inform you about, how you would go about the whole process of doing the research. Now, research onion is quite important, but, and then we go into the fourth chapter, or the fourth stage, which is basically whatever data you've collected, you have to look at presentation, collection of data. You have to explain how the collection of the data has been done. And at some stage, what are the findings? You'll start collating the findings that you are looking at doing. And these findings are then presented using graphs, tables, and what you try and do is here triangulate your literature review with the objectives and the findings of the research which you have collected because of the data that you have collected through either primary or secondary sources. And then towards the end, what you do is you basically look at presenting your findings, and those presentation of findings typically tend to be, what is called the chapter 5, and they would then be followed by conclusions, limitations of research, and they would also look at, maybe informing about what could be the future areas of research which the candidate, or if somebody is to look at extending this study that you have done, what could be the future areas in which this research would go. Now, this is a typical, project that normally is done when you're in university, or say, for example, when you're studying a research project, or it is an advanced business research project, whichever way you call it, but the module tends to be research. Now, we are not going to look at covering that whole aspect. We are going to be looking at basically covering the whole aspect of it, but not in that detail, because when you look at doing this particular module, in your undergraduate or postgraduate studies, you're looking at producing, a dissertation or a thesis of about 15 to 20,000 words. It somewhere starts from 10,000 words, 12,000 words, 15,000 words, but generally it is quite detailed. But here in level 3, we are going to be looking at the same aspect of what we do when we look at doing the research, in undergraduate or postgraduate studies, but we are going to be restricting it in terms of the word limit, and we are going to be looking at covering the broader aspect of why research is done, how it is done, carrying through from the proposal stage to introduction, to literature review, to research methodology, to data collection and findings, to presentation of findings, and then finally conclusion. So we'll follow the same path, but we are going to do it in two contexts. One, we're going to relate it to a topic in law, or a topic of interest in law, which could be either a case study being used using a case which has been filed in the court, or you might choose to study or research something which is related to the field of law in the UK, and in particular that could be that might not be, let's put it this way, on the opposite end, not looking at studying a particular case or something which has been through the judicial system, but here in this case a generic study that you would present, which would be looking at going through the same steps of how research is normally carried out and how the findings and the details of the projects are actually presented. So some of the slides that I have in the presentation basically reflect the standard route through which we would go about carrying the research. So we go through creating a proposal, and then if that proposal is approved, we start into the writing of the various, we get into the process of doing the research through writing various chapters, collection of data, deciding on the methodology, and those are the 5 or 6 steps that we will normally take. So in the case of research that we do, if it's primary research, you'll also look at designing a questionnaire. You're going to be collecting data from participants. You will look at the sampling size, and then depending on how you're going to collect that data, whether it's going to be from questionnaires, survey, interviews, focus groups, or group discussions, depending on what methodology you are actually choosing, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, you would go about collecting data, and then that data is tabulated using softwares like, if it's a research that you're doing at the graduate, postgraduate, or master's level, you'll be looking at using advanced statistical techniques like regression analysis, ANOVA. You're looking at, SPSS, certain softwares like Qualmetrics, SPSS, to be able to, analyze data. Because when you draw questionnaires, they could be, number of questions. And when you get that data collected, if you have, say, in a questionnaire, 20 questions, you're collecting responses on those 20 questions for each participant, and then, analyzing it using a software to come to some sort of conclusion, meaningful conclusion. So here, in the first part of the activity, I would suggest that you draft a proposal, and that proposal would cover task 4.1. And in that proposal, you're going to look at following maybe a particular, let's say, path, which is to look at defining the topic of research. Why have you chosen the topic of research? Maybe define some rationale, and also look at, highlighting 1 or 2 objectives which you are going to accomplish by undertaking the research. Now, in terms of how you're going to present it, the idea would be to try and follow the same terminology as I've explained, which we would normally do at the higher level of studies when you're doing. But here the idea is to try and understand that process and then relate it to that process, so that you are able to do it in a miniature form, or in a much more much more general form, but keeping the overall structure of how you present your research, in terms of the structure of the study being the same. So in introduction, you will introduce things like introduction, why you're looking at doing this, which is rationale, aims and objectives, and what is the reason why you're looking at doing this research, and what do you plan to accomplish when you do this research. Then in terms of the literature review, as I mentioned, you're looking at critically reviewing or collecting data which is already present in the public domain, which is literature or in data information, which is already available from various sources, and that would allow you to do a review of the existing say information which is available and related to your research. And then at some stage, then you go into what is called, we don't need to do what is the testing of hypothesis. This is normally done in the undergraduate or postgraduate studies, wherein if you're doing research, you would look at testing some of the assumptions that you make for doing the research by doing a research, or basically using a hypothesis. You can skip that part. Then we look at choice of research methodology. So you're looking at qualitative, quantitative, case study versus survey based. I would suggest if you pick up a case law from this website, which is by Lilly, then in that case you're looking at maybe a case study in terms of research, which is going to be much more simpler and easier, and would help you understand, how you have to put this into the structure. And then when you say data collection and analysis, this is primarily going to be done, from the website itself, wherein you're going to look into the details of, the research which is being presented, or the case law which is being presented. And with that case law in mind, you're looking at picking out, important bits of data which are related to your. That would be important, and that would be basically looking at collecting or presenting your findings. Then towards the end, when you have done the summarization of most of the aspects of the case law, then the idea would be to summarize your findings and then appropriately referencing the case and the details of that case using the OSCALA referencing system. Now, I would suggest that when you look at drafting this piece of research for task learning outcome 4, the whole tasks, when you look at the entire task, which is 4.1, we are looking at 4.2, we're looking at the merit task, they are all going to be in about 400 to 500 words maximum. So you're looking at about 2 pages. If you're writing about 250 words a page, or 220 to 250 words a page, you're looking at about 2 pages to accomplish the tasks 4.1, 4.2, and 4M1. Now, if we go across to the next learning outcome, which is looking at learning outcome 5, here the main emphasis is on producing the academic work. That means producing the research report. So here what you have to do is go into the second part of the aspects of the research, which is primarily adding to what you've already created, like the introduction, the aims and objectives, your rationale of the study of the research, and a bit of literature review that you've done. What you're going to do is add to this research report or the proposal that you've created in LO4. You're going to basically detail that proposal in LO5 by adding literature review, research methodology. You're adding your data collection and findings, and then looking at doing a conclusion. So here, the main aspects would be to try and produce, the work that you're presenting, but that would be written out as an academic report. And this academic report is going to be, following the structure of how normally research projects or research reports are published. So they will go into those chapter-wise fashion, and this is what will allow you to accomplish, learning outcome 5. So learning outcome 5 is all about producing basically the the research that you have done on that case law, and then structuring that into the balance part of the report, which is, when I say balance, because you've covered the introduction, rationale, aim, objectives, and the significance of research in the first learning outcome, which is learning outcome 4. In learning outcome 5, you're starting off with literature review, methodology of how you've gone about doing it. So in your case, if you look at a case law, it is going to be desk-based or secondary research, and then you will look at collection of your data, which is being primarily done from the website, and then you're looking at presenting, what was the outcome of that case study or the case law, which you have, looked at studying for the purposes of producing that academic report. So when you look at doing learning outcome 5, you're basically looking at producing this piece of academic written report, which would summarize the case law as per the structure of the research reports, which is after the introduction, literature review, research methodology, data collection and findings, and then recommendations, and that would help you accomplish learning outcome 5. Now, in learning outcome 5, when you actually submit the report to me, what will happen is that I'm going to do some viva, or some sort of a viva or question answer session with you, and this would be to understand and ask you questions about what you've produced and to check your understanding on what has been provided to me as a form of an academic report or a research report. And successful achievement of that viva or the question answer session that I would do normally, say 5 to 7 questions, 10 odd minutes, would essentially help you accomplish and achieve the merit task. Now in 5D1, you have to present your academic work to a professional standard to an audience and discuss the contents of your work. So the 5M1 and 5D1 is going to be primarily done together when you're presenting. So what I'm going to be able to do is, when you send over your research report to me, I'm going to ask you to go about summarizing that report. After the summarizing of that report verbally through the session like we are doing today, I'm going to ask you some questions related to the report and the objectives of what you presented. And then what I'm also going to do is basically, discuss the contents of the reports with you in terms of, cross-checking how you've collected the data or what you've read in terms of the case law or, the piece of research that you've done, what sources you've looked at, and that would help you accomplish the distinction part of 5D1. Now, that bit, when you look at presenting this report, we are looking at not presenting this in about 10 to 12,000 words. You're looking at approximately, I would say, 350 to 400 words. So you're again looking at about 2 pages, and I'm going to show you an example of how this is to be done, and this will accomplish your learning outcome 5. Now, in the last learning outcome, what we have to do is basically do a reflection on what you've gone, how you've gone about shortlisting, something to study. Then you produced a proposal, and after that you produced and presented a detailed report. And what we want to be able to do that on that would be to reflect, how we've gone about and what you've learned in the process of doing this, research or using research to study that particular case law or, whatever you've chosen from a point of view of study of the topic. And in this case, when we look at learning outcome 6, we are going to be looking at reflecting on, your own academic progress. So here, what have you learned from the research? What kind of skills you have developed? So skills like you've been able to, for example, look at researching skills, which could be through the website, like Wiley, to understand case laws, or the other techniques that you picked out in terms of looking at, say for example, if it was a traditional piece of research, and when I say traditional, what I mean by that is primary, and you were collecting data, so you would have drawn up a questionnaire. You know how the questionnaire is to be designed, whether it's just to have whether you have open-ended questions, closed-ended questions, multiple choice questions. You have questions with some sort of a Likert scale. That means it has some scoring or rating in the background. So if you say, how happy were you with the experience? Unsatisfied, very unsatisfied. So you start with very unsatisfied, unsatisfied. You say neutral, satisfied, somewhat satisfied, and very satisfied. So here you're starting from -2, -1, maybe neutral is 0, and then you have satisfied and very satisfied, which is up to 2. So you're drawing up some sort of a scale. So there are some learnings that you're doing in terms of how to draw up this questionnaire, and the skills that you're picking up in terms of viva, that you're able to answer the questions or queries which are raised on your research, looking at research skills, going about researching through website, looking at referencing, which you have picked out in terms of learning how Osceola referencing has to be done. You've looked at understanding, various techniques in terms of how to analyze data, which could be using, say, for example, spreadsheets, or, by studying the results of and tabulating the results of questions that you asked, assuming if you went by questionnaire or surveys. And that bit, in terms of, in addition to the report that you've been able to produce, the academic writing report that you've been able to produce, things like the research proposal, which was initially drafted, looking at, then presenting the balanced part of the report using the, research format. And then last but not the least, being able to answer questions or field queries related to the research that you have done. They would help you reflect on your skills that you have been able to develop while doing this process of undertaking the research. So in Learning Outcome 6, you're looking at reflecting on your skills. So here, what I would suggest is, we are going to be looking at developing a table. And this table essentially for task 6.1 would say, what do I want? So this is a standard table that I've created, which basically helps you do your reflection on when you undertake this piece of research. So why did you need to take a piece? Why did you decide to undertake this research? How would you go about achieving it? What resources or support was required? What are the various sources from which you actually picked out or seek the information? And what was the target date that you had put for completion, and were you able to complete it on time? So when you look at this particular table, this will help you translate your reflection in specified areas, which will be looking at covering task 6.1. Now, in this table, when I add, if for example, in this case, if I am not able to achieve, so if I, for a moment, so assuming this was the reflection on academic progress, and basically the academic progress was reported up till this point, that whether you achieved or not. And then if I have to say that if there were areas in which you were not able to achieve or not able to conclude satisfactorily, then what is the plan that you've developed in order to go ahead and achieve those, from a point of view of completion. So in this case, we add another column here, and this column is going to be a target date for review, because what you're going to do is some of these things you are going to pick out and develop over a period of time. They are not things that you are going to be just, develop overnight. They are going to take a bit of time for you to develop, and you'll have to set some target dates, review dates, and these review dates will inform you whether you're, hitting what the defined targets that you want to achieve. So one such thing, for an example that I would give you is, if I look at, generically speaking, if I take an example just, outside this task and explain that if I was looking at learning a language, assuming I was looking at learning Spanish as a language, what I'm going to do is primarily, look at first making a plan in terms of how I would go about learning Spanish as an additional language. So I will look at why do I want to learn this language. That is some of the reasons and background in terms of why I actually have decided to learn Spanish. Then I would look at how do I go about achieving it. Am I going to attend some classes? Am I going to look at tutorials? Am I going to get personalized tutorials? What books I would buy? What resources would I need? So then I would get into listing down, how would I go about achieving it? Is the activities that I need to do. Then we need to look at what these activities would require in terms of resources. So whether you require books, whether you require tutorials, whether you require to go and attend or get a private tutor in place, they are going to be resources. And then how would you measure your success criteria? So I need to also define that, I will look at, what level of Spanish you want to achieve, beginners, intermediate, or advanced. Then I need to put some sort of a timeline to it. And after which I have gone through, say, a particular timeline, and I want to start with learning beginners, and I will give 3 months for that. Then after 3 months, you would do a bit of a review, and you would see how much you've accomplished, how much you've achieved. And if something is still pending and that has not been achieved, what you will do is you will put a timeline to develop that further so that you're able to achieve the beginner's level of Spanish, or the proficiency that you need in the Spanish language to the beginner's level. And then again, you will review it against the time frame that has been set. So when we look at reflection, you're going to make a plan, and that plan will reflect on how you went about doing your research, whether you had whether you were able to achieve the objectives of doing that research, whether through it was case study or through primary research methods, or did you do a desk-based research. Did it help you achieve what you were trying to understand? And then what were the resources needed? What kind of websites, journals, articles you went across to collect or understand or gather data? And then what was the success criteria? That means, were you able to achieve the objectives set out for your research? One or two brief objectives at this stage at level 3, which would inform whether you've been able to achieve those objectives or not. Now, if you feel that the objectives have not been achieved, then what you're going to do is develop this plan of action to further improve your project report and then achieve the objectives which were set out when you actually drafted the proposal. And that part of would be stretching, your what you have completed into a plan with adding some plan here, and that would have some target date and review. And what you're going to do is monitor it to see whether that has been achieved or not. And then if this progress, then after once you have done this, then you share this with me. What I'm going to do is review what you have actually started off with in learning outcome 4 at the time of submitting a proposal. Then I will compare that with the academic report that you produced, and I'm going to look at what have you done in terms of your own review that you presented in learning outcome 6, which is to reflect the progress that you've made in doing this particular research. And I will put that to put that in some context to say that as your tutor, I'm reviewing it and I want to see whether the research proposal presented meets, the requirement, and that requirement is now then satisfied in learning outcome 5 in terms of producing an academic quality report, and that report that you produce, and then you've done your self-review, and in that self-review, have you been able to reflect on what you've learned and what, when I say what you've learned is what new skills you've learned, and have you been able to review the skills to the best of your ability. And that, as a peer review when I do, or as a review that I do as your tutor, would inform essentially that whether you achieve the merit task or not. So this would help accomplish learning outcome 4, 5, and 6, which is a bit of a practical task in this unit, which is to understand how you go about doing research. And in your case, because we are doing it in the context of law, the idea would be to try and pick out a topic in the context of law. And that topic could be either a case law, or it could be a case study specific to the field of law in the case of England and Wales, or in the case of UK, and that has to be produced first as a proposal. You have to give out a proposal in terms of why you're looking at undertaking this research. And the second learning outcome 5, which is looking at producing it into an academic report format. And then the last learning outcome, which is learning outcome 6, looking at reviewing your own progress against what you started off with, what you have accomplished, and if not, then develop a plan and then review that plan, which will inform what is the progress that you've made and what skills you've developed, and that would essentially accomplish and complete this particular unit. So any questions on this so far? Any questions that you have? Any doubts in terms of how you want to proceed? Or how will you proceed essentially? Any questions at your end, Johnson? So if assuming this is quite clear, then what I can do is I can end the session today and then make this copy of recording available so that you can look at a few sites from which you could pick out, cases which are, or let's put it this way, topics which can be chosen specifically in the field of law, and they would allow you to start developing a proposal, which will be the first requirement for learning outcome 4. And then you can email that proposal to me at learnerwork@ukversity.co.uk, and that, once I approve it, you can go about then developing that into a report, or start producing it as or presenting it as a piece of academic work, and then followed by reflection, which will be done to reflect your academic skills or skills that you've gained by undertaking this research activity. If you have no questions at this moment, that's fine. You can also ask me questions later, and that can be emailed to me at raman, R-A-M-A-N, @ukversity.co.uk, and I can get back to you with more information. So what I'm going to do is put some topics and put some sites or links to some sites on Moodle, which will allow you to go to these sites to pick out or shortlist topics that you would want to look at in terms of researching for law, and we will make a start from there. So thanks very much for joining in today, and I will catch up with you next week to discuss in detail maybe the requirements of the overall unit in terms of the assignment.